It is really a pleasure to introduce Kelly Stanton. So Kelly is joining us from Qualio, and Qualio is a trusted quality management software for businesses that are focused on bringing their life-saving products to market faster. Today's speaker brings 20 years of experience in both the pharmaceutical and medical device industry. She has been an implementer, administrator, and users of many different EQMS tools on the market, and she's built several quality systems in her time. She also serves as an advisor to dozens of medical device and pharma companies, helping them to adhere to the evolving regulatory landscape. Today, she's going to be talking about the shift to digital and leveraging cloud-based quality management systems. I personally have interacted with Kelly in the past in a small company environment and can really attest to and appreciate what she brings to this space. So Kelly, it's a pleasure to welcome you.
Yes, thank you
for joining.
Thank you. Yeah, this whole industry, talk about a small world, right? So we were just chatting about some of those experiences, and that was a lot of fun. So let me make sure, there we go, yay. Cloud-based quality management systems. How many of you are on paper? Less and less, I'm glad to see. It's not something to be scared of, going off of paper. I realize it feels wonderful and controlling, and you've got your printers and your stamps and all of those things, but you can really move a lot faster if you're off the paper. So we'll talk a little bit about why going off of paper will make it so that you can unite your teams, your processes. Data is much more available. You don't have to pay people to enter things into spreadsheets so that you can do, tracking and trending or data analysis and that kind of stuff. And I'll give a few tips for migrating off of a paper system if that's what you already have. A lot of practice with that in my career. I have a couple of case studies I'll present, some existing customers that are being very successful in the space. And then audit best practices. While that feels a little random, the whole goal of your quality management system is to get through your audits, right? Get through the regulatory paths. Make sure that your processes are well documented, all that kind of stuff, so that you can show them to other people. So we'll talk a little bit at the end about how being electronic is really going to make that a lot easier. All right, so Qualio, who are we? I think a lot of people maybe haven't heard of us yet. We're growing like crazy. So we're a lean quality system tool. We really believe in what's actually required by the regulations, not what is everybody's interpretation of what else do we need to write down. Quality people love procedures down to that detail, and here you've got to use this blue pen, and you've got to write all these forms, and you've got to have 5 other people sign it. We came screaming on the market about 10 years ago, and we really have tried to be lean, efficient, and fun. Quality can be fun. So yeah, it can. I'm laughing. It really can be, I promise. Actually had a customer one time who got done with an implementation, and he's like, man, this is great. Maybe I'll do my taxes next, and I'm going, oh my God, like, okay, yay. Glad you think about quality and taxes together, right? There's some things you want together, but we leverage a lot of our G2 reviews that customers can review us. Our customers agree that our approach is simple, compliant, and easy to use. So important that it's easy to use. So breaking down the silos, paper makes it easier to have silos, right? To go chase approvals around a building, find different departments. They're in different parts of the building, different parts of the organization. Why do those things? In a paper-based system, those are your only options, really. So we recently did a survey, Life Science Quality Trends Report. Swing by the booth later if you want to see the entirety of the data that we've collected. It was really interesting. So folks that are still doing things on paper are still spending inordinate amounts of time doing administration. You know, if you've got this piece of paper, somebody's going to sit and take information from that and put it in a spreadsheet so that you can actually start to analyze the data, have that data start to be useful. So it was fascinating to me that there's still, you know, 25 to 50% of a working day spent on things like populating spreadsheets, making reports, you know, quality control, batch inspection, sampling, testing. You know, there's so much power in that information if you can actually do something with it, right? So if you're operating on paper, you then have somebody who has to translate that information into methods that make it useful. So across industry, 38% of people are still only using paper and spreadsheets to do that kind of work. This is 2022, like that's just mind-boggling to me. Quality assurance, auditing, training, documenting, et cetera. 53% of our respondents still spend more than a quarter of their working day just gathering that information and keeping track of it all. So again, in this day and age of computers and all the power of that information, you can't unlock it if it's locked away on paper. I think our resistance to that, though, is based in the regulatory requirements, right? And I hear that a lot from more conservative customers are, you know, but when we did it on paper, we had this control, or we had this, you know, ability to control the information or control the change to that information, right? Because change, ooh, there's a scary word. The regulators are really starting to realize that there has been historically too much of a focus on compliance. Manual quality control activities, you know, if we don't write it down, it didn't happen, right? That's one of the things we all say in the industry all the time, especially if you're a QA person and you're talking to someone who's maybe in manufacturing. You did something, you didn't write it down, right? Now we can't show that it really happened. So when there aren't tools and systems in place, there aren't enough resources or energy to put into quality improvement. You can't take your system to that next level if you're spending all of your time and focus just managing the system, okay? The system needs to work for you. It's really hard to do that on paper. So if 80% of the effort should be in improvements, things that we're doing to improve the product, improve the manufacturing processes, ultimately improve patient safety, if you're spending all that time transferring your data into a spreadsheet, you're not spending the time and the effort where you should be on the improvement of the processes. So in the journey to world class, you know, quality control, kind of that base layer across, you know, one of the things too I think people talk a lot about is you can't, you know, you can't test into compliance, right? The processes have to support the activities, make those activities easy for your operators, and that really helps you get to that place over time where you start to focus on improving your processes, not just trying to keep up with the baseline of documentation and collecting that information. So how does the cloud help us with this? How does going electronic help us with these things? Well, again, so we talked about, you know, at the beginning that people, you end up with quality specialists whose whole job is just to extract certain pieces of information and then put them into a tool that gives you the ability to do that data analysis. If that's across a bunch of spreadsheets localized on people's computers, or maybe they're, you know, in a SharePoint type drive or whatever, you don't have a lot of control around the changes to that information, or, you know, did you validate that spreadsheet? I mean, some of those kinds of conversations have to come into play because the information is just too scattered. Another way, too, with breaking down those silos, you know, in the cloud, it's much easier to do things like have API integrations to other tools, right? nobody in any organization does all the work in just one tool, right? There's your, maybe there's your learning management system. And if you're doing manufacturing, you probably have an ERP or building monitoring systems. You know, you've got all these pieces of data that are scattered in all these other places. So if you have a system at the center of that that can be the central source of truth, and leverage your API integrations to bring those data points together, then the people doing the job can work in the tool they know, right? One of our big segments of customers is software as a medical device. Those guys are a bunch of software engineers who use Jira and maybe Asana, some of those kinds of tools. They're using Git as a code repository. There's so much information that your QA team needs to have visibility of in those other tools, but now I've got to work in 5 other places, right? As the QA specialist, I have to go over to Jira and monitor for changes, or Git, or any of those kinds of things. And so if you can leverage API integrations and bring all of that information together, your quality team can do what they really need to be doing, which is overseeing the pieces of work that are happening, but your engineers can keep working in Jira and being very happy in their world, and your warehouse folks, they can keep working in their ERP system, whatever that is. But there are pieces of those systems, those information that can come back to your quality system, and have that visibility into all of those tools that your QA team needs to be effective. A good EQMS tool is flexible, configurable, can match and enhance the company structure and the ways that you work. You want that flexibility. A tool that's too rigid, a lot of your older on-prem solutions, and I have experience with a lot of those guys from the past, they're very locked down in the way that they function, and because they're on-premise solutions, you can't really adapt them very easily to your business either. So you really have to, you really end up either working with them and spending a ridiculous amount of money to customize the solution so that it works for you, or, well, I won't go down that rabbit hole. There's a lot that can go wrong there. Cloud-based access from anywhere. We're coming off a pandemic where a lot of us worked remotely or had to transition to that. If you were a paper-based quality system, you probably didn't get to work remotely, or you had to have a scanner, and there's a lot that goes along with that too. So in this world where we're outsourcing, we're traveling, we're working remotely, all of these different things, an electronic quality management system makes all of that a lot easier. Version control. Wikipedia tools like Notion, for example, it's a great place for a repository of information, but as you guys know, from a regulated perspective, there's no actual control over that information, who owns it, how is it kept up to date, all that kind of stuff. So a good EQMS tool, obviously version control is key and critical to those requirements. Workflows, drive collaboration, concerted action, single sign-on, making access easy. All of those things are ways that EQMS tools can help. But efficiency in those workflows, that's probably one of the single biggest, best reasons to go electronic with your quality management system. So, migration tips. I have all this paper, I have my processes, they're all well documented. Now you're going to just upend that. So to get started, ask the right questions as you search for a vendor. It is amazing to me how often people are shopping for a quality management tool and don't know what they actually need it to do. And have a realistic expectation of what it can do. And it's funny because it could either scope creep as more people start to hear about it. Oh, you're buying a QMS, well, does it also do calibration? Ah, you're buying a QMS, does it also do batch records? Are those things really key critical requirements that you're after, or are they nice to haves? So make sure you've got, first of all, a good team together, good stakeholders. Document your requirements. What are you trying to achieve? Understand what you're doing now and how you expect this tool to help you change that. And a good vendor I mean, of course, they all want to sell you something, but they're going to have experience in this, and it's going to be a lot easier to make those transitions if they've spent a lot of time doing that already, and can help you start to think about, maybe here's a few other points to consider or things where people trip. Elect a champion. Champions, change agents, can help manage the cultural change of moving to a digital quality system. They can spread awareness, encourage participation, secure the support of senior management, internal traction, buy-in, all of those things. Should be somebody that people in the organization generally have some respect for. Don't give the job to the intern. Here, go find us a new tool, and they're the only person who has the time for it, but maybe they don't have experience in all the aspects of a quality system. Those projects generally don't always go well, in my experience. No paving the cow path. You guys familiar with that term at all? Software is something software people talk about. If we're going to make an existing process electronic, paving the cow path is where you just take your existing process and now you move it into the cloud, and you don't actually make any changes to the process. This is an opportunity to make things more efficient, to really look at the various processes as a whole and figure out how to make them more efficient, how to make them easier, how to drive engagement in your organization. It's continuous improvement, not just assurance and control. I did one of these projects once where everybody in the room was very, very attached to the way we were doing it before. And so we ended up making a lot of changes to this tool that we purchased in order to make it match the processes. Boy, over the long haul, that's been very painful. And I have some friends still at that organization, and they still struggle with these things because we made the application so custom that any time then the vendor would release updates, we couldn't update. So that actually is a bigger risk in the long term than if we had just looked at the process and said, is this really necessary to do something as simple as complaint handling? It doesn't have to be complicated. But we had bolted on all of these other aspects like failure analysis and MDR reporting, and all of these things became key elements of that complaint process. So we tried to make the tool also accommodate all these other elements that weren't just complaint handling. So to this day, they're still using that tool, but they've had to decouple some of those customizations in order to just do updates for things like security patches and stuff. They couldn't do any of those updates. Case studies. Irisys came to us about 3 years ago. They're in pharmaceutical manufacturing. They have 75 users with us now. They have an OTC in market, and they were paper-based. 6 of the people, of those 75 people, were QA, and they were really struggling to keep up. People were spending their whole days just doing documents, and so they were able to expand their quality participation across the organization from those 6 core people to really embed quality across all of their processes. And so they now count 60 people as either QA administrators or input type situations where they're overseeing aspects of the data generation that goes on there. They're using our system to maintain documentation for hundreds of specialty manufactured therapeutics at this point. So again, a lot more efficiency in that. And they are trying to recall exactly where in the world they're located, but they've been using Qualio to complete their internal auditing, and they're ready for an FDA audit at any time. Now again, so 3 years timeline, right? FDA wasn't doing on-site audits. So now that FDA is back doing those things, I think they're gearing up for that. But the point being that there isn't a lot of paper to herd here, so they know they're ready. Expression Therapeutics, I love these guys. They have recently built out 43,000 square foot manufacturing facility and came to us right as that project was getting going, because they weren't going to do anything on paper. They were just, no, we're not. We're going to go from day one, we're going to be paper free. And so it's been a project to get their QMS, you know, the base elements of quality systems like dot control training, that kind of thing, very simple. We were really able to free up their time and allow them to focus on their manufacturing processes, because we helped them with their quality system processes. So they didn't have to spend a lot of time writing dot control SOPs. That was all already kind of built in. But having all of that from the beginning meant that it's not going to be a transition for them later. So instead of getting all of this off the ground and then having to change the system in a very big way, they started from the beginning with going electronic. All right, so then jumping over to audits. Why would this be relevant to just being paper, you know, going off of paper to an EQMS? Well, you're always ready for an audit, right? And so I can recall days of, you know, prepping the back room and the carts where we all, you know, we'd have to go gather all the binders and here's our SOP binders and here's all the manufacturing process validations and having all of that stuff staged and inventoried. And so we would spend weeks getting ready for an FDA audit to make sure that we had everything at the ready right there. Well, in the case of electronic QMS, it's already ready, it's already staged. You know, there's no physical movement of all the stuff to a location that makes it easier to deal with. And so, so you're always ready. You have access, and you can also have some better control of the information as well. One of the things that we like to do, because we get audited a lot by our customers as a supplier, is have you know, the core SOPs. Everybody always wants to see, you know, we need your SOP list and we need your quality manual and we want to see your quality system procedures. That's all already put together in our EQMS, and it's already tagged in a way where all I have to do is invite the user into our system, make those documents available to them, and boom, there it is. You know, there was no copying them, saving down, you know, everything to a shared Dropbox location, making all that stuff available, right? So if you guys have experienced some of that in your auditing of vendors, for me personally, if they've already got EQMS, you know, if they've got an electronic quality system or electronic document management at least in place, the information flow is a lot easier. And the permissioning in the system should be sufficient that you can curate the content too. So, you know, if the supplier or the auditor wants to see a particular set of linked procedures, I can just add them right into, you know, their permissions. I don't have to go, again, find it in the drive, save a copy, no, you can't print this, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Training records, same story, right? A good EQMS has all the training available. You know, they look at the org chart, which is also available through my electronic quality system, and they pick a couple people. They want to see training. I can make those records available to them in real time. Once the audit's over, findings are easily tracked. You know, you should have good workflows that make this easier. We can assign out the tasking to the right owners for corrections. So I don't have to get everybody together in a room. You know, it's like, nope, here's my CAPA that's related to this audit finding. Here's the things we're going to go do. Assign it out. It's all happening immediately. No generating copies of forms or tracking the master form. If it's a CAPA, for example, you know, who's got the binder today? Oh, gosh, spent a lot of time chasing binders around. You can reduce the meetings too. Again, if you're not collaborating on paper, we don't have to gather all of that information into one place. People can put it into the system and into the workflow as they're working on it. And then as the quality administrator, the person responsible for that CAP, I can see it all happening in real time. I don't have to have that status update meeting where everybody brings their notes and their binders to the conference room. So all of that speeds things up. I get asked a lot about, you know, well, how much does it speed things up? I'm not sure how easy it is to directly measure these things, But definitely, I can tell you anecdotally, and I think most of our customers would agree, makes it a lot easier. All right, Q&A time. I think we have got about 10 minutes. What questions do you have?
First of all, Kim, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Excellent presentation. I guess one thing I'm curious is just what you're seeing in terms of your customer base. How many are coming in that are, paper-based, coming to you for a first electronic solution versus those that have been on electronic solutions and are switching over to you?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I think sort of it depends on where they are in their journey. In my experience, I would say it's probably fairly evenly distributed with, and it's certainly not in the pharma space specifically, you see a lot more that they've already got paper in place. It's harder to get further down the road without having anything, right? Medical devices are a different story. Those guys will come to us greenfield, right? Maybe they've got some design control files, but they have nothing else from a dot control perspective. So within that segment, the pharma, we've seen, it's amazing to me that there are still so many companies doing it on paper. So I would say probably the majority are coming with some form of paper. Maybe they have a little bit of a hybrid system. Like they've got procedures and things that they're managing still with wet ink signatures, but then they might have a learning management tool that they've integrated with. So they have some training records that are electronic.
Yeah, great, good, thank you. Any other questions that are out there? Yeah, good.
Hi, Gerardo Rivera from AstraZeneca. What is your experience with other regulatory agencies like Anvisa, EMEA, all those people with this type of software? Do they actually accept it, or do they?
They do. It's interesting. I think I'm finding that outside the U.S., the regulators are actually more accepting of it than in the U.S. And we have customers all over the world. So we have several we're kind of breaking into that the Asia market, so Singapore and some of those guys. Done a couple of systems under PICS. The core elements are the same, and so I think as long as you can, demonstrate the control of the data, the information, the configuration, those kinds of things, I have not seen, and I should knock on wood, but I haven't seen any of the regulators come in and say, nope, you can't be electronic. I think having the good understanding of your processes and where the risks are associated to those processes, and making sure that you've thought about that and that you've built, because the software can do so much, there's still people involved, right? So what pieces do you need to control from a procedural perspective versus what pieces does your software do for you? Making sure you've got a good understanding of how the combination of those things then meet the intent of the regulations. I think when people do that, I haven't seen that it matters which regulator walks through the door.
Hello, Irene. I work for Pioneer Immunotherapeutics, and many companies, I think most of us, we work with a network of partner companies, whether it's contract organizations, suppliers, and the challenge that I have seen is about the touch points between quality systems internally, and the touch point with the quality systems of our multiple contract organizations. And some of them may be on paper, others may be electronic, but on a different system. We validated Adobe Sign to approve paper documents. They validated DocuSign.
Yeah.
So any advice from your perspective on those touch points and integration, and how do you manage this landscape that is inherently not going to be homogeneous?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think probably one of the first things I would say is if your SOPs are stating things like you will only accept documentation from Adobe Sign, you have already restricted yourself to working with only people at Adobe Sign. You know, there's an appropriate level of detail to demonstrate control. And so the more appropriate way to write that would be you would accept, you know, compliant electronic signature generated as long as it's generated in a compliant manner. And do you need to go so far as to document which ones you feel like are compliant? Like that's a rabbit hole of control is what it is. And so if we back away from that rabbit hole and say, look, what's really important here? You know, I mean, last time I bought a house, I signed everything electronically, and it was a system I'd never heard of, right? Buying a car with the bank during COVID, same thing, right? My bank was like, well, we've had to implement this new electronic signature methodology because we're not letting people come into the building right now. That's a lot of words for make sure that your procedures are appropriate for where the risks are. If your vendor is using a validated electronic quality system to generate their documents and that's what they're providing to you, then in your selection of them as a vendor, part of that was, you know, yes, they have a system and yes, it's appropriate and we have or have not heard of it. And if you feel like that's really a risk for you, then spend the time in that audit to dive into that system and understand it so that you can then accept their documentation and not, you know, the biggest waste of time would be to pull their documents that they've already signed and approved, and now you're going to put it in your system and you're going to sign it and approve it again. Really? Like, that's not value add in the big scheme of things. And so I think, you know, that slide about spending, you know, we spend way too much of our time focused on that level of detail. There's a person and there's time, and so you have dollars tied up in that exercise. At the end of the day, you accepted this vendor and said, yes, they are sufficient to do this job that I've hired them to do. Those details are not, we shouldn't treat everything like patients are going to die, right? That's one of the things about risk assessment, and this would tie into that, right? What's really important here, you know, these are the things that mean if something goes wrong, patients are going to die or have to recall a product. Everything else underneath that, you can start to leverage your quality agreement with them, you know, your supplier audit. They're sending me documents electronically. Do they have the processes in place so that I know that the data they're sending me that they signed is the integrity is there? Document all those things through your vendor qualification process, then you're good. And make sure that your procedures are written in ways that allow you to accept that information because you have all of this other stuff in place that says, yes, I trust this vendor. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah.
All right, well, I'm sorry to cut us off here. So Kelly, again, thank you very much for the presentation. I know if you've got more questions, head to the booth. Quality's got a booth in the Expo Center, so head to the booth. You can answer your questions there. Right now, what we're gonna do is move into the one-on-one sessions again, networking, and it's also a happy hour, so it's time to grab an afternoon drink, head to the one-on-one sessions, and then we will close the afternoon with the plenary sessions. Thank you all.